Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, and today I'm here to talk about Season 2, Episode 4 of Showtime's Yellowjackets, entitled Old Wounds. And this episode title is interesting because it has both a figurative and a literal meaning in that, you know, there's old emotional wounds that are opened up, like Fork Face with her mom, or Ben's flashbacks, or adult Lottie's past coming back to haunt her, like with the Laura Lee stuff. But then you also have literal wounds as well, like Lottie having to cut her hand for the umpteenth time during the course of this show. And speaking about the episode as a whole, I'm a bit torn. You know, this season, it feels like the stuff the show really wants to focus on and put all of its effort into has been really good. But then there's been other aspects of the show that I think are clearly getting less attention, and they're not working for me very well. For example, I mentioned Ben's flashbacks just now when I was explaining the title, and I kind of had a minor problem with the Ben stuff this week. Last week, the beauty of the Ben flashbacks combined with how bad a shape Ben was in, it gave that story arc a feeling of finality. Like, you know, as Ben begins to die, he hallucinates about what could have been. Oh, and it feels very like this is wrapping up his story. It's both romantic and it's very sad. It's heart-wrenchingly sad. But then you turn around this week, and not only are there now more Ben flashbacks, when again I had this feeling of finality last week, but Ben seems to have made a miraculous recovery from being nearly dead and hallucinating to being back to fucking normal, apparently. And that just kind of like retroactively took away some of the power of last week's flashbacks. The stuff that made last week's flashbacks feel special was the finality of it, and the idea like, oh man, this is what he could have had as he is looking like he's about to waste away at any moment. So then you come back and you have him looking like back to how he was, you know, at the end of last season, and you have him, and then you have these additional Ben flashbacks, and it's like, well, that kind of takes away from the magic of last week, right? Like, I'm not tripping on that, but I'm asking that rhetorically. Actually, no, I kind of want you guys to answer. Like, do you think I'm tripping, or like, did it have that kind of finality last week to you as well? And there's kind of a lot of stuff like that in this episode that I'm going to talk about. But then there's like, and when I say stuff like that, I mean like kind of minor things, but leave me kind of just like, I don't know how I really feel about that. But then there's a lot of stuff that's really good too. So let's get into it. I feel like this show requires so much of me. Like it's surprising. I always feel like Succession requires the most of me. But I look at my notes for this show, and every week I'm like, this is gonna be a 40-minute video. Like, there's so much to go over here. But I'm gonna of course try to keep it as brief as I possibly can. All right, so I want to start with Taisa. Knight Taisa gets into a lot of adventures in this episode, both in the wilderness and in present day. In the wilderness, Knight Taisa has been leading Van to various locations that have the symbol. Van's been making a map of these locations, and is determined that since the locations form the symbol as well, she can essentially predict a new location where a symbol will be at that Night Taisa won't even have to lead her to. Of note in these wilderness scenes is how the show is continuing to widen the divide between the logical people and the spooky wookies. I'm gonna call them the spooky wookies because they're the ones that believe in all the magical, mystical bullshit. Clearly, I have a preference on which way I would be if I were there, but I'm gonna continue to call them spooky wookies. I just need to give them a name. Like I have Night Taisa. Like I need to give these things names so I can just recall them instantly. And I say, oh, the spooky wookies, and now you're automatically gonna know it's all the people who are like Team Lottie. Where was I? Oh yeah, so the divide between the logical people and the spooky wookies, and how these differences in viewpoint are going to end relationships, or at least strain them. Like the relationship between Natalie and Lottie, the relationship between Van and Taisa, stuff like that. And side note, does this sound like modern day politics to you guys at all? Like disagreements in perspective causing like relationship ending divides? Is that not modern day politics, right? But still on this point, Van continues to try to bring Taisa over to the spooky wookies by continuing to push her to talk to Lottie, which Taisa has no interest in. And then also as if Lottie is some sort of wise sage and wasn't banging her head into a window last season. But I mean, I'm being facetious. Like I understand why Van believes Lottie can help. And then there's another scene where Mari makes about the dumbest argument anyone has made on the show by saying that Natalie, the person who is out hunting animals, is the reason they don't have food because she won't join up with the spooky wookies and wish upon a star for food. She's the one out. She's out there fucking shooting animals and getting it. So like that, again, these more and more examples of things popping up that are just gonna separate even more so the logical people. But then the girls kind of debate the bird situation from last week as well, or was that episode 2? I don't remember. Like they're like, did Lottie cause that to happen with the the blood dripping on Shawna's on that towel, or was it just a coincidence? They decide that Natalie and Lottie about to have a food fetching competition, and we'll get to that later. But like I said, I just wanted to talk briefly about the widening divide among the girls and surrounding the logical people versus the spooky wookies. But moving on, still within the Taisa section of this video, when Van and Ty arrive at the symbol location, do they find a new symbol? No, they do not. Not within a mile of that spot. What they do find is motherfucking Javi, whose immediate instinct is to run. And at first I thought, why would he run? But then I remember, I'm like, well, look at what he saw the last time he was with them. He saw them about to like kill and eat his brother or some shit. So they looked all rabid and just really, so of course it would make sense why he'd run. Is anyone else excited to find out what Adam was up? Javi was up to all the time he was missing. Also, that actor aged significantly since season 1. Well, he aged 1 year, just like everyone else in the cast. From anyone from baby to adult, aged 1 year since the last show. But since he was young at the time, he has physically changed, I think, a significant degree. Like, he looked a lot taller. He looked a lot older. Like, he must have hit puberty in the time in between seasons 1 and season 2. I also have a pretty big theory. Actually, pretty big theory is kind of understating it. It's another Yellowjackets massive, all-encompassing theory that I'm going to talk about when I get to the Natalie and Lottie stuff. And that's going to tie into Javi a little bit as well. But a couple more quick things on Taisa. Present day, Taisa goes to Jessica's house, and not to look for her to see if she's okay. No. But to find info on the Yellowjackets, and ultimately she ends up getting an address for Van's job, I should say. And the best part of this whole episode to me was discovering that Night Taisa, who operates in the daytime in 2023, drove that woman's car till it ran out of gas. Regular Taisa, I'm assuming that was regular Taisa because she just kind of like woke up. Regular Taisa wakes up and just leaves the car. Like man, Night Taisa and I can't even call her Night Taisa and Day Taisa because Night Taisa operates in the day, but the two Taisas are something else in the modern day timeline. I can tell you that. And like I said, she hitches a ride and ultimately ends up at Van's job, and that's how we close the episode. So I want to move on and talk about Natalie and Lottie. This is going to be the meatier portion of the video, which is wild to say when I'm already like 9 minutes in. But like, There's kind of a lot to cover here, not just what happened on screen, but some stuff that I liked and didn't like with this storyline. And then I'm gonna put my theory portion in here as well, rather than saving it for the end. So the Natalie Lottie stuff's gonna be probably the longest portion of the video. So starting off in present day, Lottie's meeting with a shrink who's not her normal shrink, and she talks about having these visions again for the first time in a long time. And she wants to up her meds to prevent the visions from continuing. Assuming, again, the visions are referring to like what we saw with the bees and shit at the end of last week. So the shrink then actually kind of like encourages Lottie to embrace the visions. Kind of like, what do you think they mean? And all this kind of stuff. And I can't tell if I should think this is a good doctor who is like, hey, we're going to fix things holistically by tackling the issues that are causing these visions. And we're not going to bury these feelings with prescription medications, or if this is just some asshole with nefarious goals who's trying to get Lottie off her meds and turn her into like Antler Queen 2.0. Like I have, again, this is gonna feed into the theory a little bit, so we'll get there. The Lottie stuff in present day, kind of similar to the Misty stuff, which I'm gonna get to later as well. Both days are kind of dragging for me, and I think this show has struggled in season 2 with continuing to make the adult timelines interesting. You know, the adult storyline was driven last season, or in the first season, with that who is stalking them kind of thing. And we always had that thematically throughout the whole season, whether it was like, is this a mysterious entity? Is this a real person? Is it Adam? Like all these different things, right? And then we eventually start to work toward discovering what's happening. So it had that like season-long arc that helped make the adult portion, the whole thing, interesting. This season, the Misty stuff is really slow. They've added an adult Lottie, and her stuff is slow. And that's also dragging down the adult Natalie stuff as well. And now Christina Ricci and Juliette Lewis, who were the best last season, just seem kind of really stuck in the mud so far this season. Like, they get opportunities for like lines and moments, but their storylines just kind of seem to be pedaling in place a lot. Fortunately, adult Shawna and adult Taisa are still pretty compelling. But let's head on. Moving back to Natalie and Lottie. Natalie and Forkface are going to a farmer's market to sell their colt honey, and they make a pit stop at Forkface's childhood home because she wants to see a fish. I remember thinking that not only is that a weird reason to want to go there, but we have to learn something important at this pit stop, right? So the mother then proceeds to like throw Forkface's past attempts at suicide in her face, and saying stuff like, the fish, if I give you the fish, it's gonna die anyway, because you're just gonna open up your whole goddamn arm and die, and then no one's gonna be alive to feed the fish. Like, what the fuck's wrong with this woman? Which I think that's exactly the moment where Natalie comes to the room and says like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And then Natalie then sneaks the fish out of the house in her mouth, and I'm kind of torn between like, LOL, Natalie, you so crazy. And why the fuck didn't you just take the bowl? Like, I don't know. I don't really know where I land there. I guess what makes sense doesn't matter when you want a shot of Juliette Lewis spitting out a fish into a mason jar. You want that shot, you're going to do whatever you got to take to get there, and fuck what makes sense. But that's what they did. I also wonder how come no one is pointing out to Natalie, and no one on the show is going to do this. This is me pointing this out to Natalie, that she's still hanging out with them every time she ridicules the cult. Like, you can't shit on Lottie's rules and crack jokes when you're going to the farmer's market to sell their colt honey with them instead of leaving like you supposedly want to do. And no one's going to be like, hey, why are you shitting on us when you still hanging? No one's going to say that. They want her to stay. But I'm going to say it. You can't shit on the cult when you hanging with them. Like, you better go home, and then you can shit on the cult, like, online. But you can't be hanging with them. Anyway, in the wilderness, like I mentioned earlier, Natalie and Lottie start the food fetching competition. Lottie finds the symbol at the same time as Natalie finds some tracks. Natalie cuts her hand over another one of these tree stump / shrine areas, while Natalie finds antlers stuck in ice in a lake. Natalie comes back to the cabin like, hey, I found enough food to last us the spring. You just got to help me get it. And Mari's stupid ass is like, that's not the rules of the competition. And I'm like, I can't wait till they eat Mari at some point, because she continues to be stupid as fuck, and she has a smart ass mouth. I can't stand a smart mouth person who's always wrong. And then as they all leave, she kind of tosses her hands up in frustration. Like, why won't anyone listen to me when I keep saying the stupidest things of anybody in the cabin? Like, that's why no one listens to you, Mari. Meanwhile, Lottie hits full-on hallucination mode after she cuts her hand. And let's talk about some of what she experiences here, because this is now the theorizing portion here. I'm going to get off into my theory. So, for starters, she finds a lot of Laura Lee affiliated things within her vision. Couple this with the visions that included Laura Lee in previous moments, and I'm wondering why a dead character has suddenly become so prominent. Like, it makes you wonder, like, is she really dead? Like, yes, we saw her in a plane that exploded, but like, I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I still, there's no, unless it's either them trying to tell like maybe she's not dead, or it could just be Lottie's way, their way of telling us that Lottie is struggling with allowing Laura Lee to do the things that ultimately result in her death. Like, there's guilt there for Lottie. Lottie then opens up a Lost-inspired hatch in the plane that had, for what it's worth, Laura Lee's chain necklace sitting on top of it, as if to say, go down this hatch. As she goes down this hatch into a tunnel with an elevator, which takes her to a mall, and she finds all the girls again, including Laura Lee, and who was prominently featured in this vision as well. And I think, that could be one of the old wounds that the title is referring to. The idea that Lottie is struggling with not having done enough to prevent Laura Lee's death. But again, it could be a lot more literal. Maybe she's, again, seeing a vision, right? Van mentions an Abercrombie store. Lottie says she doesn't have a credit card. It's a really weird scene. Then Laura Lee essentially wakes her up, and she's back at the shrine in the cold, freezing to death. And it seems like she may have envisioned something that happened in the past, or a scenario that feasibly could have happened if the plane never crashed. And, with her with her visions and whatnot, it's hard for me to really glean, like, okay, is she seeing something that is supposed to clue her in that Laura Lee is alive? Or are we dealing with, like, guilt that she has over not being able to prevent Laura Lee's death? I'm not sure, but I do have a theory about this that I'm going to tie in with a related Lottie theory at the end of this Lottie portion. So there's a lot going on here. Yes, my big colossal grand theory is kind of like two theories smushed into one. Anyway, I'm all over the place, man. At the same time, everyone else tries to pull the moose out of the water and they fail. And that kind of left me wondering, like, what is the point of the moose thing? Like, of course, there's still plenty of time for that to, show me something where I'm just like, oh, okay, I get it now. But it was like right now, it feels like, hey, there was a moose. Now there's not anymore. And I'm like, why even introduce the moose? Because they didn't get to eat it. And it didn't fundamentally change the characters in any real impactful way, unless the whole purpose of the moose thing is that it kind of sort of caused Natalie and Lottie to bond at the end of the episode a little bit. I don't know, but not really sure about the moose thing. Last thing here, and this is now we're getting into the meat of the theory here. Adult Lottie is sifting through these like affirmation cards, and she sees a Queen of Hearts with the eyes blacked out, like somebody like scratched with like a black marker or something. And I want to talk about this because there's some connecting pieces here between Adult Lottie and Teen Lottie that I think can help clue us in on what's happening. So first, let's talk about the card. The eyes are blacked out. Where else have we seen blacked out eyes? The entity that Night Taisa follows in the woods. Okay? So we also know that the girls use playing cards to like make minor decisions, like, oh, if you draw number 4, you got to do this, right? And Lottie had that whole thing last week, talking to Natalie about how the queen bees, emphasis on the word queen, killed the others so that for the betterment of the hive. And I even hypothesized last week, like, okay, when she's talking about this, is she talking about what they had to do in the wilderness in the past? So tying that in here, I think that ties into the queen card with the eyes blacked out. And now let's talk about the blood. So I've already talked about the idea that this entity, he, it, whatever, like I said, like people are not all over the place, but like there's a lot of debate on whether it's he or it wants blood. We've seen the spilling of blood cause a lot of weird shit to happen almost every time that blood is spilled. And the spilling of the blood feels very sacrificial. So Lottie sees the card. She tries to unsee it. She sees it again. And then she leaves with a knife. And she goes to what again, mirror not almost not mirror images, but again, a tree stump that looks to be kind of like a shrine. It looks very similar to what we've seen in the wilderness multiple times. She cuts her hand, she drips out blood, and then she asks out loud if this can be enough. She says, I believe she says, like, can this be enough now, please? Something like that. Here's my theory. It sounds kooky to me. Like, most of the time I'm like really behind my theories and I'm like really like gung-ho, like, yo, I think this is what's happening. I'm hedging on this theory because it sounds a little bit too off the wall for me, and both pieces of it a little bit too off the wall, but at the same time I feel like there's enough on the screen to justify it. What if this entity that's constantly calling for blood sacrifices and this Queen of Hearts with the eyes blacked out was the entity's way of kind of like requesting that? Furthermore, what if the entity or someone working on its behalf, like, oh, I don't know, the substitute shrink, is intentionally making it so that Lottie goes off her meds so that this exact thing can happen? She can get these visions again. She can start doing, cutting her hand again, all that kind of shit. The question is, to what end? Also, if the queen card is tied to what Lottie said about the queen bees and having to kill the others for the betterment of the hive, is it possible that the girls in the wilderness use the Queen of Hearts card in their playing deck to decide who gets eaten at some point? Like, oh, you draw number 4, you got to empty out the pee bucket. You draw the queen, you tomorrow night's dinner. Like, is that kind of what happens? And then, like, maybe Mari pulls the Queen of Hearts and she ends up being the next night's main course. I hope so. And then if that's true, maybe Lottie receiving or seeing the Queen of Hearts card in present day was an indication that maybe she's next, or that the entity is requesting her life. And maybe she's saying, when she says, like, can't this be enough, please? Instead of saying, like, instead of that meaning, can this be enough blood? It means, can this blood be enough? Rather than you need my whole shit. Like, you need my whole life. You can't just, like, can this blood just be enough? Like, so I don't know. I know I'm doing a lot with this, but I kind of feel like, again, there's stuff on the screen. Like, everything I said, I told you something on screen to support it. Last thing on Lottie, and I want to tie this back to the theory that, I mentioned earlier in the video when I was talking about the mall sequences and the wilderness vision. We see a lot of stuff with Laura Lee, which, again, I still can't really make sense of, right? She goes down a hatch, then through a tunnel, and I feel like Lottie has a lot of visions where it looks like she's underground. Like, we've seen her looking like she's in, like, underground tunnels with, like, shrines and candles and all this kind of stuff. And Lottie has already proven herself to have some sort of, like, sight, where she could see what's happening. Like, she knew what, like knowing the Javi was alive, for instance. Do you think it's a possibility when Lottie's having these visions and she's in these tunnels that what she's envisioning is real? Like, there are literally underground tunnels underneath the wilderness where they live, and the markings of the symbols on near the trees are maybe like entry points into the tunnel? Because this would explain a lot, right? Whoever is leading Night Taisa maybe is trying to lead her to make this discovery. Maybe there are survivors of a previous incident that live down there, and that would explain maybe like the patches of slightly melted snow that we keep finding near the symbols. Maybe those are like hatch doors or something. They don't know it yet. She envisioned the hatch door and went down like a shaft. Like, I don't know. It feels kind of spot on. That could also explain how Javi survived for all this time. And then when Javi does pop up, I don't think you see her face, but you hear Van's voice in the background go, where the fuck did he come from? Like, I feel like even though the idea that there's like a tunnel system underneath the ground sounds completely fucking ridiculous, I feel like it's a justifiable theory based on the constant the constant visions of tunnels that we see with Lottie underground. It explains how Javi survived. It explains the melted snow. It explains even some of the other mysteries, like maybe like who stole the bear meat? The mystery in this episode. Who stole the bear meat? Maybe somebody who's living in the tunnels. They come out at night and they went in there and they stole the bear meat so they could eat. Like I'm telling you, like it feels simultaneously kooky and simultaneously like, yo, I feel like this is what's happening. So I don't know. Let me know what y'all think. But like, I'm kind of sold on the shit. I don't know. And this is a thing that I didn't even think of this while I was watching the episode. It's like these things come to me when I'm formulating my notes to do the videos. So like when I get the shit all organized over here in my notes, and I'm looking at this shit, and I'm like, this is the time where I get to think, right? Most of the time when I'm watching the episode, I'm just watching it. But then I think like, okay, let me try to make sense of these visions. Let me try to make sense of it. I even went back and I watched that scene again. And it's like, I don't know. I just feel like, I don't know. I feel good about it. I feel good about it as a theory, even though it sounds completely ridiculous to me. Let's see, 25 minutes. I got Shawna, Misty, and some thoughts. But these are going to be probably the shortest portions of the video. So I think I'll probably be able to beat 40 minutes. When we first see Shawna, we learned that she did in fact lie to Jeff about the van. So that answers my question from last week. Jeff then tells her that the cops know about the affair with Adam. Again, we saw that last week with Kevin. Shawna finds the my hated, miraculously preserved piece of Adam's ID in Callie's room, along with condoms. So now she know, at least she knows she's fucking, but at least she knows she's safe. And I remember writing in my notes, I hope Shawna is prepared to be called a hypocrite when she confronts Callie about this. But then, when the conversation happens, they strangely sort of like injected humor into it. Like with Shawna trying to correct stuff that sounded really bad and then realizing like, no, that actually is kind of what happened. Like, I don't know, that felt really weird to me. Like this kind of also marks the portion of this video where I'm largely gonna be talking about the stuff that I didn't like. I've hit a couple of things so far, like with Ben, but like and talking about how the Natalie stuff is and the Lottie stuff, I mean the Misty stuff is dragged. But I don't know, I just felt like that was a really, really strange time to try to interject humor. Like I envision like a writer's room where they're talking about Shawna finally explaining to her child that she killed a man, and then someone in the room going, now how do we make this funny? Like, I can't see that happening, but like that had to have been what happened, right? There's no way you think like, all right, let's go write the scene where Shawna tells her daughter that she killed a man, and you just naturally write humor into it. Like I kind of feel like somebody had to be like, yo, let's try to make this shit funny. And no one had the balls to be like, why the fuck would we make this scene funny? Anyway, Shawna later tells Jeff that she told Callie everything, and then as Jeff is getting pissed off about that, Callie, seemingly respecting the honesty that she's now been delivered, comes in and confesses to not going to her friend Alana's house and to drinking, and she asks if she can help cook, which she's been very standoffish toward her parents. So, who knows? Maybe this family is gonna bond over infidelity and murder. Who knows? Moving on to Misty. I hate to say this, I really do, because she was my favorite character in season 1. I was banging the Christina Ricci should win an Emmy drum from while season 1 was still airing. But the Misty stuff in this season just seems to be getting worse and worse to me each week. Like last week, I complained about how after the Misty scenes, they learned virtually nothing. And what they did learn didn't even matter for us because we already knew it, us the audience. This week, again, we end the Misty scenes with them having learned very little, that Lottie's cult goes to the farmer's market and that they operate somewhere nearby off Route 19. And we learned nothing at all because we already knew what little bit that they learned. And it just feels like they keep finding ways to kick the Misty finds Natalie can down the road, and they're doing it pretty lazily by just consistently having Misty be a step behind, by having her learn so little each week. I did watch the trailer for episode 5, and they are finally, Misty and Natalie are finally going to meet up. So I know that this is the end of this portion, but this portion has not been good. I think it's going to elevate significantly when you now have Misty, Natalie, and Walter together. That should be good stuff. But like I said, right now, up to this point, it's felt kind of like, I don't know, it felt like this was dragged out too long. Misty should have caught up with Natalie in like episode 2 or 3. Last season, the stuff with Misty and Natalie moved at a great pace. But like I said, this stuff's just really dragging for me this season. Did I say last week or last season? I don't know. Then I gotta say, it really annoyed me when Walter told her that being a Yellowjacket is the least interesting thing about her, which is just objectively not true. Like, few people in the history of time have experienced what Misty did, and it's the least interesting thing. That line was so ridiculously inaccurate that I don't even care if he was just saying it just to suck up. Like, if he had said, I don't care that you're a yellow jacket, cool. If he says, there are things about me that interest you more than you being a yellow jacket. Like, I want to learn about who you are as a person, Misty Quigley. Corny, but that's cool too. But don't sit there and say it's the least interesting thing. Like, it's absolutely and unequivocally the most interesting thing. Like, but if you want to suck up, just pretend like it's not, just pretend like it's not first. Pretend like it's like third, something like that. And for what it's worth, I don't chalk up my disdain for that line to the Walter character. Like, I don't think my takeaway from that scene is that Walter is a putz. Like, I think that was just a lazy writer who's heard that line be flattering in instances where it was actually applicable, and they didn't take the care to consider that it just does not work here. You cannot say that somebody who's been through something like that's the least interesting thing about them. Like, it is by far, it's the most interesting thing about Misty. You can't tell somebody who spent how long were they in the woods? I don't even remember. However long they were in the woods, stuck in the woods, all that time, some of them don't even make it back. They presumably had to resort to all kinds of shit that Lord only knows. They ain't talked about it. And then you can be like, oh, that's the least interesting thing. Shut the fuck up, Walter. You kidding me? There is nothing more interesting about Misty than the fact that she's a yellow jacket. Fuck out of here. Oh, Jesus. Then there are other moments that are kind of ridiculous to me too, like another Walter one. When they're at the farmer's market and they see the cult isn't there, Misty wants to head to the spot off Route 19 that woman tells her that they live at. And Walter's like, whoa, it's getting dark. And I'm like, it's high noon outside. It's broad fucking daylight. Like, there's like harsh shadows. The only reason they look like that is because all the tents are covered. But like when you look in the background, it's like harsh sunlight, like noon, 1 p.m. sunlight. And I know that feels like me nitpicking, but that kind of stuff just takes me out of the moment. Like, don't have a character say it's getting dark when it's broad fucking daylight and I'm looking at it. Like, come on, dog, it looks like it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's getting dark. No, it ain't, man, it's not. Like, I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that. Like, don't have characters say it's getting dark when it's bright outside. Like, I feel like I shouldn't have to say that. And then there's this montage that's meant to show us how similar they are to each other, where they're like searching through their rooms. And I'm just not here for like a forced romantic relationship. Every show with women doesn't even need to have a goddamn romantic relationship in it. Misty was 100 times more interesting when she wasn't paired up with a man. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, closing with a couple of quick thoughts. I'm gonna beat 40 minutes, yay. What's up with these weird random mysteries that are just continuing to increase in quantity? I'm posing that to you guys. You got the person who shit in the pee bucket, the dripping that Mari keeps hearing, the stolen bear meat, like all these random things. I propose that, I can't believe I'm saying this, I propose that there's motherfuckers who live in underground tunnels who are doing some of this shit. I don't know, but like, okay, well, what's the dripping? Like, they played a prank, like somebody's on the roof just like dripping? So, no, of course not. And again, I find a lot of problems with the shitting in the pee bucket, just naturally. But someone else coming into the cabin is shitting in the pee bucket? No, I can't. I don't know. So I don't know what to make of these mysteries. Like, is there a literal person who is fucking with them? Is it just Night Taisa doing stuff? But why Night Taisa seems to have more of a purpose. She's very intentional. It doesn't feel like, hey, I'm just Night Taisa. I'm just gonna terrorize. Like, I would propose it's something mystical, but I have a hard time wrapping my head around a ghost shitting. So like at the same time, I'm like, I wonder if it's possible to secretly shit in a pee bucket. I feel like whoever sleeps close to it's gonna smell it. I don't know. There's too many people in the cabin for someone to sneakily take a shit. I don't see it. And then lastly, another favorite part of this episode for me is when the black girl who they show just enough for us to remember her face, but not enough to remember her name. I don't know what they're gonna do with this, but I like when she finds Mr. Jangles like John Coffey. Like, she's gonna keep it, boss. Suck took it back though. I don't know why. I just thought it was funny. Like, she found the mouse from the Green Mile. Like, I don't know what's gonna come of that. I hope it's something interesting. I hope they find a way to make it feel even. I mean, I'm talking about Laura Lee being not dead. Javi is theoretically kind of sort of come back from the dead. If they can find a way to kill this mouse and have it come back. I'm gonna Leonardo DiCaprio meme at my TV and be like, Green Mile. So that's all I got. Let me know what you guys thought about my crazy fucking theory and all the questions I asked in this video. And I'll see you guys next Friday for episode 5. And until then, peace.